Welcome to Roof Chill Episode 2. I am one of your hosts, Melaney Ann Mitchell, and we are Informality blog. This entire series is sponsored by a rocket grant from the Charlotte Street Foundation, the Spencer Museum of Art, and the Andy Warhol Foundation for the Arts.
I'm one of your hosts for Roof Chill, Blair Schulman, and if you want to know more about something and other things, you can find out by looking it up on the internet, which is where everything can be found.
Also remember, if you want to respond to anything in this video, you should send us an email, editor@informalityblog.com, or go ahead and make a comment down below, and we will respond to your comments in our next video. All right, welcome to Hot Potato, our new segment where we toss this hot potato and talk about contemporary art in Kansas City as fast as we can. All right, so this week, Blair and I were at a booth doing guerrilla docents for SWxC Street Festival for the August 2016 First Friday, and they do this festival in order to benefit Imagine That, a center for developmentally and intellectually different adults. And there was an art exhibition, a fashion show, and a musical performance, all of which we were outside promoting Informality and doing our guerrilla docents.
And another show that I saw that I really loved was Ryan Wilks' Gender Treason at the Lady Volkus Arts Center in the basement gallery. He had been spending a couple of years working on these portraits of straight, gay, lesbian, queer, gender non-conforming people. He ran the whole gamut of everybody, and it was very beautifully and very sensitively done. And I can't say enough good things about this show, and I hope a lot of people went to see it because I thought it was one of the best shows in Kansas City of 2016. Something that I saw recently was Flesh Crisis 2016, a 3-day art symposium directed by Jessica Borusky, beginning July 7th, 8th, and 9th. I, however, only went to the first night on July 7th. There were 6 artists that evening, 2 of whom that really stood out to me were Wolfgang Butcher and Dominic Burkhart. Wolfgang Butcher was laying atop this twin-size air mattress over baking flour, and he was breathing in and out of this deflated mattress for about 2.5 hours without a break, without talking to anyone. Eventually, he wound up completely covered in the flour. He was just breathing in and out as if he were hugging it, like he was almost making love to it. It was really very sensuous. I wasn't sure of Butcher's intent, but he remained focused on this one concept of love, and he kept breathing life into it, even as it seemed to dissipate. I think if one had to make a comparison, I would see references to the work of Felix Gonzalez Torres. His steady breathing into this mattress was a metaphor for the constant energy we put into our own relationships. It was really interesting. It was a very beautiful thing to see. Butcher's performance was occurring simultaneously with others, and another person was Dominic Burkhart. He started out with his arms tied with rope over cotton batting, suspended over the floor, and the cotton batting looked like clouds, and he was wearing a loincloth a la Tarzan, or maybe it was a crucifixion, depending on your religion. Eventually, he let himself drop. Then he started to dress himself in these layers. First, he started with this mosquito netting, then he put on a sweatpants and a sweatshirt. Then from underneath the clouds, he pulled out a textbook and started doing his homework, and this textbook was on queer theory, and he started reading from it. I had to walk away because I don't even like to do my own homework, let alone watch someone else do theirs. So I left, and I came back, and he was paying attention to the glass wall behind him where there were these cellophane stickers that he proceeded to run and pull off. The final sticker was way up high, and he was having a really hard time trying to reach it. I kept watching his steps and counting his steps to get to it, and it was driving me crazy because he kept taking the same 4 steps, and he kept getting closer and closer, but he could not reach it. And I just thought, what are the metaphors in all this? Because I really didn't understand what any of it was. He seemed to be working through some very complicated experiences. I appreciated the effort, but there was a lot going on, and it seemed a little bit heavy-handed. Simplicity, like Butcher's piece, is best when you're asking an audience to divine insight through metaphorical applications. However, I do want to see more from Burkhart, and I look forward to seeing what he tries to do next.
So what I really wanted to talk about was Corey Antis's work that was at Haw Contemporary as a part of an exhibition called Works and Days. In this exhibition, he showed large-scale drawings, probably 50 inches by 30 inches or bigger, very much a human scale, as well as large-scale books and smaller square-shaped books. On the opening night, the books were laid out on the table with one page open, and it was this kind of tenuous relationship where people wanted to touch the work. They wanted to feel the books, and they couldn't. So it was interesting seeing everything presented, and I went back and looked at the show again. And when I looked back at the show, I realized I needed to make a studio visit with Corey because I was interested to see further how this work was coming to play. And he started posting on Instagram these watercolor paintings that are super realistic, usually from landscape and observation. And when I went to his studio, I discovered that this is a consistent practice for him, is working on these watercolor paintings. There are books and books of sketchbooks filled with observational watercolors. And it made me realize that these books in the show are him taking the poetic moments that he finds in these observational watercolors and distilling them to that perfect, discrete moment of that specific feeling or intent. And then putting them and not being afraid to have the material tell something different. I think that his work is really pliable in that way. It allows for one to come into it and leave at any point. It is something that is going to show more about ourselves than we're willing to even acknowledge. It's about pattern recognition. That time where you're thinking about all those numbers, or you're thinking about how these different things interplay and relate to one another. Corey is really astute in his ability to take these parts of our human experience and distill them into visual phenomena that we can enter in and find these moments that we're familiar with, but we also are unfamiliar with, and find these kind of deja vu style moments that are a little bit scary, but really, really viscerally interesting. When I was speaking with him in his studio, he also talked about how to find the beauty in the mundane. And I also found it really interesting, his stories about working with his father as a roofer. And when you look at some of the pieces in the exhibition, there are all these layers of paper that are torn and sanded and changed and shifted. And when you think about that and you think about these roofing stories, it's really clear that he's got this romance with this material because he has always worked and been working with material since he was young. So it's really interesting to see how these pieces can show us more about ourselves than sometimes we're even willing to let on.
Our guest on this episode of Roof Chill is Rachel Gregor. She graduated in 2012 from the Kansas City Art Institute from the painting department. She's shown work at Lady Volkus and Subterranean Gallery in Kansas City and Wonder Fair in Lawrence, Kansas.
So Rachel, what are you working on right now?
Currently I'm working on more portraiture work, oil painting on linen. This past spring I was doing a lot of still life work. So now I'm kind of going back into the figurative. So.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You were also working on a zine recently too, weren't you?
Yeah.
Tell us about that.
So the zine project is a lot of graphite on tone paper, botanical drawings, and then also still referencing like Dutch Golden Age still life work. And so the zine's going to be called Flowers from Home. And so it's a collection of native flowers from Minnesota, where I'm from, to Missouri. And they're all kind of organized by season and also where they grow, like wetland or woodland. And yeah, so it's just kind of a nice collection of flowers, some of my favorite. And I think it's kind of personal for me too, since my family owns a nursery and I just kind of grew up around flowers.
Sure. So your work is autobiographical in nature to some extent.
Yeah, definitely.
Do you, a lot of your portraiture and your flowers, it evokes this kind of soft, quiet mood. Do you have to be in that mood to bring yourself to the canvas, or do you just kind of drag yourself there and make it happen?
I think I kind of have to be in that mood, but you should, I've been trying to get in the 9 to 5, work schedule and be able to paint regardless of my mood, because if I'm treating it like a full-time job,
right.
I need to be ready to work.
So you're being disciplined about it?
Yes.
Well, that's good. So when you're working, what music is playing in your head?
Typically not distracting music, because you can kind of get that music ADHD where you're just like on Pandora hitting next, and it's just so distracting. This past week actually is really nice. I was listening to Villette by Charlotte Bronte on audiobook. So it's kind of nice to listen to, books while painting, because then, if I start getting distracted by something else, like Facebook,
Mm-hmm.
It's like, I'm not listening to the novel anymore. I'm not painting. And then it's like, oh shit, what just happened, you know, in the story? Oh shit, I'm not painting. I better stop, you know, messing around if I want to figure out what happens. So, yeah.
I think thinking about that, like the Bronte sisters and like zine culture, how do you see yourself in like the discourse of, I mean, painting, I'm not a painter, so is it still going? Just seeing the Bronte sisters influence, or not even influence, but I read a lot of Bronte sisters when I was younger, so seeing that kind of visual of your work and the Dutch flowers in zine culture, like where do you see yourself in that as a painter?
I don't know. The thing that I was excited about with the zine is because I'm not involved in, you know, the zine culture and the scene. You know, I went to ZineCon last year, but
so you are involved in the zine culture.
You know, as much as like, you know, looking around, but like, yeah, you know, I'm not a comics writer, which, you know, I guess you see a lot of comics and zines, but, you know, a zine can be anything, which is kind of exciting. So I thought, you know, I've never seen a zine like what I kind of wanted to do. I thought of it maybe just a nice collection of, you know, art and prints. So that was kind of my approach, and maybe it can be slightly, you know, educational or dorky, but other than that, you know, I think zines are just like cool things to have on your table and flip through. Right. So, and having that, you know, as a painter, you don't see a lot of that so far in zines. I don't know. So,
what I find interesting is that I do know plenty, not a ton, plenty of painters here in Kansas City putting out work in zines, but not their painting work. Yeah. So I think that's interesting.
Yeah, no, because I feel like there's a tendency to want to go illustrative with the zines. Just either, whether you're printing with a Xerox or Riso or whatever, it's just like easier to make it look graphic or illustrative. And so I stuck to like graphite on toned paper, you know, 2 tones, so that it still can print nice, but still has the, you know, the appearance of my own studio work. Yeah. So,
thinking about the perspective of scale, did you have to change the way that you were creating the work for the zine as opposed to what you do in your portraiture work?
I was fairly comfortable. I made sure I was printing on, you know, the size of the print versus the size of the paper. It was going to scale down correctly. So I was working on maybe like 9 by 9, 10 by 10 paper, which was okay it was a little tight sometimes. Sure. But it was all right.
And what is the normal scale of your canvas work?
It depends. Like when I was doing all those self-portrait series, it was usually around the neighborhood of 10 by 10. And that's typically the smallest I'll go with like an oil painting on linen. But some of the larger stuff is, probably in the neighborhood of 30, 40 inches.
So in a lot of your paintings, you create fictional spaces that are based on reality. Do you want to talk about those spaces that you make within your paintings?
Yeah, so the kind of environments that I put these girls in, I think of them as, just kind of like exhibition spaces, like at a zoo. Kind of like these curated, like little doll rooms. They're very much based off of real places from my childhood, like my bedroom or my grandparents' house. But I want them to not feel quite naturalistic. Like I want them to feel very still and curated, like you're looking through a window, but is that really a window or is that just a backdrop, or is it just, a blue colorscape that leads nowhere? So I kind of want that eeriness of like, are these girls trapped in this place where they can't escape out of, or,
So is it voyeuristic or contemplative?
I think a little both.
Really?
I mean, I kind of like that duality. Like some of them definitely feel very voyeuristic, but I mean, also voyeuristic in the sense where you go to the miniature museum and you're peeking at everything. And these girls kind of have this room made for them, and you're not really sure, like, is that her mom's blanket or did she pick that out?
Right.
Because that's kind of an ugly Afghan.
I feel a lot, whenever I see your paintings, I feel a lot like I did, and the name escapes me, but the first photographer who compiled film negatives to make that funeral, like the post-mortem scape, I don't know if you've ever seen that, but it was like the first time that a photograph was used in a collage way, and people saw this dead body composed in this really beautiful room, and that kind of freaked people out. I feel that same kind of antagony, where it's just like, I don't know if these girls are.
I've always been interested in that kind of like duality, like comfortable and not comfortable. Like, am I supposed to look? Am I not? Is this girl like a doll? Is she real?
Right.
Like, who is she? So.
Or if they're real, are they living or dead?
Right.
I'm sorry, I'm going to the creepy.
Well, I do like those fleshy, rosy tones. Hopefully they look like they got some blood pumping in them. But,
Sure.
Yeah.
And I think on the other end of that, like, fleshy, rosy zone, you also have a lot of colors sometimes that come in, like that bright pink opera rose, and those, like, really, really sensual, almost like 90s nostalgic colors. Do you want, like, your own interest within things like anime or Animal Crossing or like the cute Japanese to come through in your work, or are you less interested in that?
Sometimes I definitely think about, I mean, Animal Crossing is like, you know, playing in a dollhouse, you know, it's kind of like this curated world. And so I kind of, you know, the moving furniture around, you know, I think about that. And anime, less of an influence, I guess, like the big eyes and maybe rosy cheeks, but it's not quite to that extreme. I might have pushed it there more when I was doing those, you know, self-portrait studies a lot. I would think of like a still from an anime and kind of push it towards that, but not so much anymore.
Okay.
Yeah.
Are you having people sit for you, or are you doing these things for memory or photographs, or where
A little bit of all of it.
Really? So you do have people sitting for you.
Yeah.
And also the tableaus with the dollhouses and things like that. Those are coming from memory, or are you sketching these things out first, or how are you doing it?
Like a lot of my work is from memory. I try to avoid photographs as much as possible, especially like just using one photo for one single reference, because I believe the photo can kind of really distort, you know, your perspective because of, you know, fisheye and everything like that.
Sure.
I don't like relying on it too much. It can become a crutch for me. So I try to create a lot from memory, and then just like either looking at a room I'm sitting in and be like, oh, that's how a corner works, you know, or looking at my own body, or having someone sit for me.
Sure.
Yeah, I think kind of I have the most fun when I have a sitter, but you don't always get that luxury, and usually I'm looking at myself most of the time. So, yeah.
Sure. Do you want your work to have a relationship to the real world, or do you want it to be more fantastical?
I want it, again, there's that weird, like, I want it to be believable to a degree. Like, I want it to be like, okay, this is a real room, it exists somewhere, but...
Maybe she doesn't.
Yeah, maybe something seems a little off.
Yeah.
Yeah, like, I don't want it to be like, oh, obviously not a real person in a believable space. You know, I want it to be real. I'm a dork. I like anatomy. I like perspective and figuring that out. So I don't want it to look too cartoony, but just enough.
Sure.
Just enough.
Yeah. Kind of reminds me of like when you hit a wall in 64 and you get to that point where they've got polygons and you're like, well, it's believable that this is rocks, but it's not really
Or
rocks.
you remember it as the most realistic thing when you were, 8, and then you play Ocarina of Time again. You're like, why is Link so pointy? I don't remember that.
I don't think any of your figures are real pointy though.
No.
So do you see like 1960s like fashion culture coming in? Because that's in your home a lot.
Yeah, I think, again, like I said, like, is that blanket her grandma's blanket? So a lot of that I'm pulling from actual, like, objects that were in my grandparents' house or in my parents' house. They're very sentimental for me. So I'm kind of placing them in there. I'm treating them like they're artifacts. So I'm putting them there, kind of making them really precious for me in the painting. And I think the viewer can kind of get a sense of that. And yeah, a lot of those objects do come from like the 60s and 70s. And it is like a really wonderful aesthetic in that era too. And I don't want my figures to look too contemporary. Like, I don't want it to be like, oh, it's a portrait of a fashionable girl right now.
Right.
Because I think that can get a little too distracting.
Yeah.
But is it like, oh, this girl chose to dye her hair, and why did she do that? I like more those awkward middle school moments rather than that, oh, that's a cool hipster girl right now.
Sure.
So do you feel like your work, while it is quote-unquote apolitical, is talking about things of feminism and the way that we find our identity as we grow up and
Sure.
at that age?
Yeah, I mean, I think my work is definitely a lot about, like, girlhood versus womanhood and that awkward tension between there. Some of it, more paintings than others, are maybe about body issues, but again, I don't try to put one whole message like that in all my paintings, because you can't answer, a question like that with every single work every single time, or have one painting that answers that question every time.
Sure.
And so I think that there is that tension between girlhood and womanhood, and maybe what she feels like she has to be. And again, that's why maybe that room doesn't seem right. Like, was she put in there? Was this place made for her? And so, yeah, there is that tension.
Sure.
I mean, I was just curious how you respond to, like, people saying that your work is feminine and soft. And, I mean, obviously there's women in them, but just, like, the feminine aspect of it, like, how you respond to that.
Yeah, I mean, embrace it. Like, it's funny because, like, a lot of these paintings I think of as myself, but like when I was in middle school, I was a total tomboy. Like I was not, like pink lip gloss, Abercrombie. I was total goth, but there was definitely moments where I felt that need. So like, and I'd be alone in my bedroom and be like, pink lip gloss, like what is this like? And that's that moment that I want, that awkward tension, like expectation versus reality and who you are. And yeah, just kind of like peer pressure and that awkward like punk girl versus prep girl and what the hell's going on 2000s, I don't know.
We just wanted to say thank you to Rachel Gregor for being here on our second episode of Roof Chill. And if you are interested in seeing more of her work, go ahead and go to www.rachelgregor.com. Also, don't forget to subscribe to our videos if you want to see more from us. And if you make a comment down below, we'll respond to it in our next episode of Roof Chill.